Hey, everybody, welcome to another great episode of The Asian Americans. Actually, we don't know if it's going to be great yet or not, but I think it's going to be great.
Crossing our fingers.
Crossing our fingers. We have a really, really fun guest today. I've known this guest, Jared, now 23 years, going back all the way to high school. And if you've been listening to this show for a little while, you know that most of my friends are guests, or the other way around. Most of our guests are friends. And we're old enough now where high school friends count as oh my God, I've known somebody for 20 plus years. Jared's been an amazing friend. He's done some great work in the community, and he's taken a different path. If you are listening to this right now and you're a college junior or older, the top thing on your mind right now might be, oh my God, what do I do in terms of a job? Perhaps you're listening because your offer was rescinded, or you are approaching summer with no internship opportunities. Things are changing very quickly, and businesses are choosing not to continue their internship programs, or perhaps putting stops on it altogether. And worse yet, if you're graduating, whether from undergrad or from graduate school, not only are there fewer opportunities, you don't even know if the ones that you have are going to be there in a few months when you're supposed to start. We're hearing way too many stories from all sorts of different companies, small and large, on the ever changing landscape. So, um, Jared, many, many years ago, has decided to do something about that. And it is not a quick band aid fix, it is to really build a long term, forever um, community to help students and people seeking answers about careers with those who are lucky and fortunate to be in those. We're going to be talking about that and a lot more fun stuff. So, hey, Jared, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jerry.
You know, we are now both on the west coast of America, although we went to
We are
school.
now.
We are now, and it's sunny both where you and I are. And But we grew up, or we met in high school in New York City. We went to high school in the Bronx together, and um, you know, where we went to school, it was an interesting demographic, right? Because it was a school that was a test-in school. For folks who are unfamiliar with Bronx Science, it is a part of the specialized high school program in New York City, where any student who attends junior high can take a test, and if you score a certain amount, you can choose to go to Bronx Science or one of the other really, really great schools in the city. But it does pull from the population of the entire five boroughs. Is the school reflective of this population of New York City? Unfortunately, not. But the good thing, I
Not,
guess, for us was
not
we
even
were
really, not even really close.
not really close, but it is better. It was more reflective than where you would have gone to school locally, because New York City, from a
Yeah.
demographical perspective, is extremely segregated, and there's a lot of differences of availability and opportunities based on even what neighborhood you are in the same borough. So really, really fascinated to learn about your upbringing. How did the Chung family come about? How did your father move to the States? Where were you born? Where did you grow up? Tell us all about your childhood.
Yeah. Well, happy to. So I was actually born in California, although you're right. We met in high school in New York. But I was born in California, and I'm multiracial. But the Asian American part of my family came to the U.S. many generations ago. When we go try to pin it down, it looks like I'm the seventh generation on the Chinese side here in the U.S. So really long time. But it was sort of I guess we were chain migrators. You know, somebody came along, and then you get another one the next generation, another one the next generation, and somebody comes in every generation, all the way down to my grandmother, who was born in China. But yeah, those seven generations have been in California as Chungs or as Louis for a long time. Um, and and I moved to New York when I was about maybe 4 or 5 years old. My parents separated, and then each remarried, and I lived in New York during the school year with my mom, and in California during the summers with my dad. So that's a little bit of the the deep background on my family.
How was that for you, being in terms of your identity? Because not only was it separation of, or a difference of mom versus dad, but New York City and California are so different. Did it feel like living in two different worlds depending on what time of year it was?
Yeah, you know, it's pretty different. I think I'd say in both cases, look, both states are great places to live, big communities. It's a not a hard place to be an Asian American relative to a lot of communities across the United States. So certainly similarities. I'd say identity. I mean, it was tricky. It's a little tricky for me. Part of the identity challenge that I had as just a very young person, even in grade school, was that I didn't identify at all as Chinese or Asian American at the beginning. Um, I was my father was Chinese, um, didn't identify as Chinese American. Didn't speak any Chinese of any kind. Enjoyed Chinese food, participated in certain Chinese traditions, but not much. Um, it was his parents who identified as Chinese. And so I think, and this is a classic story, a lot of folks, second generation, a little bit of a focus on assimilation, maybe not as much going back to roots or anything like that. So in those early years for me as a New Yorker, I thought of myself more as a New Yorker at one point, right? Because I think if you in grade school enough in New York City, start to identify with where you go to school. So I felt more a New Yorker, um, but not really um, feeling a part of the Chinese community in New York very much. My elementary school had very few Asians in it. My junior high school had very few Asians in it, and it was when I went to Bronx Science where suddenly um, I met a huge number of Asian Americans. Where the Asians are, I think back then we were the majority in the school. I
I
can't quite remember. It was like right about 50-50, if not more than 50% Asian American. And that changed a lot. That's the first time I had this. To be honest with you, it's actually, I think it's the first time I actually felt embraced by a community around identity. The people like would meet me in Bronx Science and they'd say, they like, they would sort of, I don't know, I felt like they accepted me already. And that had never happened to me before. And so there was sort of it felt easy to make friends in a way that I hadn't understood was a challenge before. I started to think of myself as more Asian American when people started to think of me as Asian American or Chinese American or what have you. And I really loved that time. Uh, look, I don't know if anybody loves everything about high school. It's objectively, it's a tough time, right? And for any high schoolers who are actually listening in, I'll go ahead and say, you know, barring major challenges in your life in the future, barring terrible health crises or other major challenges, which I hope you do not face. Like in many ways, high school can be like the hardest part of life, and things
yeah.
do get better afterward for many people. So, there is a lot of light on the other end of the tunnel of high school. Um, but for me, there was a lot about it that I really loved. And part of it was discovering that I had an identity that I could accept if I wanted, where people accepted me just by virtue of what they thought I was. And partly as a result of that, later on in life, and something I'm happy to discuss, you know, I turned back to China. I lived in China. I moved to China. I started learning Chinese. And so I kind of brought back, um, a little bit of that Chinese identity. But still, first one in my family, in my generation, to go back to China. And I believe the only one in my generation at the moment who speaks any Chinese at all.
Wow.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. You might, and from a generational perspective, you might hold the current record or title for 40 some odd guests, 40, yeah, some odd guests of
Oh, the seventh
how
generation.
long. Yeah,
Right?
because that's fascinating because most Koreans are max three. Most Vietnamese
Yeah.
folks are post-war, right? So 1975 and beyond.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really interesting that you have now gone, quote unquote, back home, not not only physically but also from a academic and cultural perspective. Um, right before we jumped on, you said you had to print stuff for your daughter's Chinese school,
Yeah.
which means that you're
I delayed our
encouraging her.
recording so I could print
No,
out
it's
the, yeah.
so for
Yeah.
all the right reasons, but it means that that's important enough for you to teach her the language and the culture, right? And it's something my wife and I talk about, right? So we have two kids, 3 and 1, and obviously we live in Los Angeles, so there's a lot of opportunities to exercise and participate in our Korean culture. And my parents don't speak great English, so in Korean would be, but even how do you balance that, right? Because it's not binary, and in a perfect world, they grow up
Yeah.
learning both languages. But yeah, let's go. I think I want to make a quick point on our high school experience, just to give
Yeah.
people context on what kind of school it was. It
What a
was
weird
almost
school.
it was a weird school. So Asian
What a weird
population
school, man.
over-indexed, right? It definitely over-indexed from the majority of, or I guess, reflection of the New York City population. If you're following it politically, there's a lot of stuff before COVID-19 of all the politics behind or the politics behind should the testing as it is or as it has been
Huge
forever.
controversy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but the benefit is, like you said, it was an opt-in process. This is not the neighborhood school you zoned into, meaning that whether
Yeah.
by choice of the student or by the parents, people wanted to go there. People chose to go there. It was not easy to get there physically because it was way the heck up in the very, very northeastern part of the Bronx. Um, but I think the connection part has a lot to do with the structure of the school. Sure, depending on where you went to high or junior high school in the city, you ended up going to Bronx Science or any of the specialized high schools with a group of friends, and perhaps it was your neighborhood, family friend, or church friends you went there with together. But by and large, and look, I moved there from California direct. We moved that summer, right? So um, I had one friend who was BJ, Big John, because we went to summer academy together. Outside of that, I had nobody. But I also felt very close and home because when we showed up on the first day of freshman year, nobody knew nobody. Everybody was like,
Yep.
all right, I guess we're going to do this. And, sort of rebuild their identity and start from anew. So I think it sounds like for you, as it was for me, it was the opportunity to chart a new path, opportunity to make new friends. Um,
Reinvent yourself.
Sure. But that wasn't all positive. Like my brother came in as a sophomore, and sophomores into science were very, very small. So by the time he got there, friendships were already built, and all the group,
Yeah.
all the social structure hierarchy had already been set. Um, Thank you for that context. I think it's really, really cool to get that. You decided to stay in New York City for college and just went down to NYU.
Well, not
And
quite. I actually went to SUNY Binghamton first.
oh, you did? Okay, I
Um,
didn't know that. Okay.
yeah. So what went really well for me was that I got a mentor, which I actually got serendipitously through the stock club after school. And the reason I was even attending the stock club or joined the stock club was because my family went bankrupt at the beginning of high school. And I knew that when I finished my education, I wanted to have money. And I wanted to have a job that was going to give me financial stability. And I just didn't want to worry about money the way that my family worried about money many times. And so I didn't know anything about what that meant. I didn't know anything about jobs at all. I didn't know what kind of jobs were out there, but I knew that living in New York City, I knew there was Wall Street. I thought, yeah, I'll be a stockbroker or something. So I joined the stock club and then got a mentor through that. And he helped me apply to college and navigate that process a bit. And I went to SUNY Binghamton, and I got another mentor when I was at Bing who helped me learn a little bit more. And then I went to NYU Stern, where I ended up getting my undergraduate degree in finance. Um, I did an internship at an investment bank after junior year and thought, maybe I don't need that much money that badly. I'm willing to, I'm looking for financial stability. I'm looking to not worry about money. I'm not sure I'm cut out for that. And so I ended up starting my career as a consultant at McKinsey and Company instead,
Which isn't
which
a
was
walk
a
in the
much
park
better fit
either
for me.
from a hours per week
Not a walk in the park.
perspective.
No, that's true. But look, there are extremes, and I pulled back from one. So I feel
Sure.
all right with that one.
I think it's fascinating, and it's really a testament to the people in our lives that unofficially help us with nothing really to gain other than the goodness of their hearts and paying it forward, and a number of different reasons. And we'll revisit
I
that.
feel like it's a gift to give. Like it's a gift to be able to give. It feels so good when you give.
It does, and we'll touch upon it when we talk about what you're doing now. But it's never about the money. It's never about financial means to give. And in fact,
Yeah.
I will argue and would love to get your take on it. I would say that time and energy and passion and love and kindness can never actually those things are far, far superior than a check of any amount, or maybe not any amount, but a financial impact gift. So let's talk about your years in consulting.
Yeah.
Because after that, you went on to start a nonprofit that helps career advising. What did you learn there? And you were there a while. You were not a two and out. You were there a little while to get multiple promotions, and you were in management, and you led
Yeah.
teams, and you did all that. What did you learn from that experience, and what did you felt that you wanted to do outside of that? Because if people don't know, working where you did at McKinsey is a ticket to go do anything. Particularly, the exits are
That's what they
full
say.
of. Well, that's what they say.
So
And
it's you could do a lot. You could
and
definitely
then there's
do a
been
lot.
a lot of test cases to prove that hypothesis. But even from a financial perspective, there are ways to exit from
Yeah.
there to a more lucrative path with better life balance, what have you.
Yeah.
But curious to learn about the things that you learned during the 5 years at McKinsey, and talk to me about that.
Yeah. Well, so I guess the first thing is, I went in wanting to do finance, wanting the job. I wanted to do consulting. I got to just acknowledge right off the bat. I mean, I got financial stability. I was living in Manhattan. I can't remember, I was $67,000 a year or something, straight out of college. I was like, I had my grandfather in California, who spent his whole life as a butcher after the military. He was like, you give, like, they pay for your entire health insurance. Like, that's he was just so impressed. Right. And so I really felt like, okay, I was okay. I made it. And so the bare essentials, just wonderful. It was prestigious. It had like this big, fancy address and Park Avenue and the whole thing. I got a lot of core business skills for sure. Absolutely. The consulting, professional services consulting training, it's excellent. You don't learn everything, but you learn a lot of really valuable stuff that's otherwise very hard to learn. I gained a lot of finance knowledge. I gained a lot of understanding of what happens in boardrooms. I sat in boardrooms at a ridiculously young age. No real business being there, but did my best and rose up through the ranks, as you said. I think I was there for 6 years. At the time I left, it was time to basically make a go or no go decision on whether I wanted to be a partner.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a multi-year process. When you say you want to be a partner at the firm, you have to basically put together a platform for your election. You have to rally your support base, and you don't just get partner and then bounce and screw everybody who just stumped for you, right? You're in for a very long time. So I went pretty far, and I had a great experience. I would say personally I really enjoyed it. I felt like I met amazing people. It was very intellectually stimulating. I felt that one of the things that I was missing personally at McKinsey was, or in consulting in general, was I didn't feel like I was that driven by the purpose. I think when I went into it, I thought of the purpose of business and the purpose of capitalism being truly a noble thing that would benefit all. And I think over time, personally, I began to feel like it wasn't enough for me. I didn't believe that. I guess I sort of didn't believe enough in the beautiful system, and I wasn't seeing that I was getting enough enjoyment out of the results of it. And what I started to do is I spent a lot of my spare time volunteering. I was mentoring youth. I was volunteering my time with nonprofits, and my favorite projects in consulting were projects for foundations or advising nonprofits. So when I wanted to leave McKinsey, decided I didn't want to be a partner. It wasn't the life for me. I knew that I wanted to take what I was really enjoying the most, which is giving back and helping young people prepare for careers. And I wanted to really focus on that. So that's what took me out of it.
Very cool. What we glossed over was the 2 years that you spent in Asia at McKinsey. McKinsey, obviously, a big global firm. You
awesome.
Can put an office. Yeah, you can find a McKinsey office in any major city anywhere. How did that opportunity come about? You obviously re-upped to stay an additional year, it sounds like, or it looks like. How did you end up there, and why did you stay? What did you learn?
God, I got so lucky. It was a time, 2000. I was in China from 2007 to 2009. And a couple of very important things about this. One is I got the opportunity to go there with the company largely as a fluke. They needed somebody who was very hardcore in financial knowledge. I had it. I was interested in going. I had a lot of friends who were thinking about moving to China. It was a safe move for me to do. My Chinese was nearly non-existent. I mean, I think it was actually non-existent. So it was a wild gamble to try to even go for it. And I convinced a couple people there that that it was worth it for them to accept somebody who didn't speak Chinese, but who was going to try their best to learn, to bring a very specific technical knowledge to the region. So I got the opportunity to go. But let's look at the years. 2007 to 2009 encompasses two major things in the region. One of them is the global recession, which is a big deal. And the second one is the Beijing Olympics, which was also an enormous coming of age party for the country. And I was there to witness those. And during the financial crisis and the resulting recession in the U.S., in China, it was a very different feeling. For those who weren't there at the time, it was scary to think of growth slowing, but we weren't thinking about contraction.
Right.
So it was like people were saying, like, what happens when China might only grow at 4%? And, that was the sort of, we're preparing for the down case, right, of that. And it's very different from what I was hearing from my colleagues in the US. And I think for folks who are looking at a recession now, perhaps who haven't experienced one as an adult before, it could be extremely difficult time for a lot of people. And that was my sort of my time in China brought me through one of those. And I think one of the just luckiest, least bad of all the bad options ways, which is to experience it in China.
Very cool. So after that, you got a promotion and went to the Boston office, where while you were still working at McKinsey, I believe, you got involved, or slightly around the time you were leaving there, I guess when you started CareerVillage, you were involved with the TEDx conference there locally in Cambridge.
Yeah, that's right. TEDxCambridge. Your research is excellent. I don't know how you I did not give you all this deep bio.
There's a really good page called LinkedIn, and
is that all on there? Good.
It's all on there.
You're being modest.
No.
I did. I got hooked up. I got pulled into the TEDx community back in 2009, I think. And partly that happened because when I moved to Boston, which I should note was like a strange thing as a New Yorker, as like a avowed New Yorker. I'm like, I'm moving to Boston, but it's good. So I moved to Boston. I knew one thing I wanted to sort of experience was all this amazing science and just all the academic power up in Boston. My wife, who I met at McKinsey, was getting a PhD at Harvard, and some of her classmates were TED fellows and really into TED. And when the TEDx program launched, they immediately applied to run TEDxCambridge, and got the license for the TEDxCambridge name, which is the way that the program works. Great apologies to Cambridge, UK. The Cambridge name ended up going to Massachusetts, but anyway, and I joined it. I attended one. And it just changed everything for me. It was a time when I felt like I was ready to leave McKinsey. And what I saw at TED at the time was just a bunch of people who were very passionate about their work in a way that I didn't feel that I could never imagine myself getting up on a stage under any conditions to like give, to share an idea that on what I was doing on a day-to-day basis. And I was so inspired by people's enthusiasm for their work. And that actually, if I have to be honest, I actually think is part of what helped inspire me to think beyond the path that I was on, the prescribed path to success, and to say, I'm seeing all these people who are amazingly excited about things that they're not my thing, but I love the passion they have for it. And there's some things I care a lot about too, and I'm not working on them. So partly in like homage to that, I actually joined the TEDxCambridge team and became the lead curator for a while for that team, just trying to find people who are passionate about their work and help them spread the ideas. Um, but TED changed over time, and TEDx changed over time. And when I moved out here to California, um, the TEDxCambridge community um, went to another curator, and has continued to grow a lot. But it did play a very interesting role for me at that time in my life.
I think
I
you
really
answered a
greatly
question
appreciate
I
it.
was going to ask, which was, when you're in and around the community of storytelling, where everybody, there's so much on the line, it seems, even though it's just a human telling a story. In those 12 minutes, you're supposed to change not only the world, but your world. And, um, the day that
Yeah.
we're recording this on May 4th, and today's episode that we aired was from Fuc Tran, who wrote a book called Saigon. But if you roll it back, his real inspiration point was the first time he stood on a TEDx stage up in Maine. And so the power of that, power of any stage, and to have the guts or the confidence or the courage to go up there and share your story, and then let the world just come to you, and to change that, I think is fascinating. Was there a particular speech or a person that you met through the process that got you to really change your paradigm on what you wanted to do with your life and what you wanted to be known for?
I'll share a couple. So I guess, so let's go back to the TEDx Cambridge that I attended just as
Mm.
an attendee before I joined the team. I remember there was tons of wonderful speeches. I still remember many of them, but two really blew my mind. So one was Kenji Alt Lopez. Oh man, I messed up Kenji's last name. I'm huge admirer of this guy. Sorry, Kenji. Um, but he was working at Serious Eats at the time as a writer, and came up to Cambridge and gave a speech talking about um, DIY sous vide, and he like brought up a like a beer cooler and talked about how you can like do sous vide
Hmm.
at home. This is before like sous vide became
Yeah,
like I don't know, like a
a
big
thing.
marketing up. You couldn't buy like a sous vide cooker for your house. Okay, you had to kind of make it yourself. But he talked about like the benefits. Look, sure, I like to cook or whatever, but this guy was just so passionate about it, and I was inspired by that. And the second person who comes to mind for me, Chandler Burr, who at the time was the New York Times critic of scents, like smells. He would criticize like perfumes and things.
Oh,
And I didn't know this was a thing, but Chandler Burr's description of smells, of scents, was kind of amazing. He was poetic. I mean, how he spoke about the way things smell. He talked about pink peppercorns, and it's such an. And I'm not even going to try to I was just inspired by his passion for smells. I never thought about things you smell. He described a smell as a single brilliant point of light.
hmm.
Look, I didn't smell any light, but the point was that he was just so into it. I was blown away that somebody could be so into smells. Um, and that's the one I attended. But later on, as one of my jobs as lead curator at some point was to coach the speakers.
Mm.
And there I learned a totally different thing, which is especially when you're working with academics who are then going to go from
Right.
the way they normally present to the TED format, which sometimes is 12 minutes, sometimes it's 18. And sometimes I go to them and I say, look, your speech, it's perfect 7-minute or 6-minute speech. If you go too long with your idea, it actually makes it worse.
Mm.
You should nail the idea, you should back it up, and then you should stop and drop the mic, because that'll actually be more memorable if you do it that way than if you try to drag it out. Oh, and three more things, right? And try to drag it out. But what I learned from sort of working with them and helping them go from their normal MO into this other sort of the TED stage, um, just how much you have to simplify things, and
Mm.
and how hard it is to craft a communication with a very specific message. You need to with great intent toward a very specific message. it was a huge amount of fun. I was really inspired by a lot of them. Manolis Kellis, I remember Manolis Kellis is like this amazing, brilliant professor at MIT. And Manolis and I, we spent a lot of time together. He knows everything and anything about DNA and RNA and all this, like, he was throwing terms at me. It was incredibly difficult for me to follow, but the core ideas and the core inspirational science of it was so wonderful.
Oh.
And so just a lot of the time was spent just trying to, frankly, dumb it down for the rest of us.
So from early childhood to 2011, you having navigated through your childhood, splitting your time between both coasts and then both parents. The fun experience at high school was for us through NYU and learning how to synthesize information, be in a room with very, very smart people in multiple cities and client projects all over the world. What led to the decision that you wanted to do something that many would consider noble, but also kind of insane? Because starting a nonprofit with that helps underprivileged students is not on the expected list of what is a McKinsey engagement manager retired to do.
Yeah, no, it's not. So I think I've sort of shared some of the kind of core motivations. I had a mentor, so I recognized how lucky I was. I was enjoying volunteering. I was ready to leave consulting because I saw that my passion lied elsewhere. I kind of shared all those things, but there is one thing I haven't shared, which I'm going to choose to co-opt your question into answering or addressing, which is I had the privilege to be able to, because I had worked at McKinsey for 6 years, because I had saved a tremendous amount of money from that. I was able to take a huge financial risk where I literally had a 2-year runway and could actually go without compensation for a couple of years to do something that I felt passionate about. That's an enormous privilege. And I see a lot of nonprofits get started. Many of them succeed. Some of them don't. But every single time somebody starts a nonprofit, they dig really deep personally. And some of them have the privilege to be able to just do that. And some of them struggle hugely. I have friends who started nonprofits who like literally rice was like their staple, for every meal, for months before things started to work out or they had to move on. So I had that privilege. I really want to acknowledge it. It's a crazy thing to do in many ways, but it's everybody who does it's doing it for such wonderful reasons. I don't think it should have to be that hard to devote yourself to a cause.
Sure.
Or that you definitely should not have to have saved up years of runway to do that. But it's so hard to get support for an early stage nonprofit and raise money for it. And it's kind of, it's unfortunate, but I think it's a part of the system we have now.
I think so. And hopefully what we're going through now in the early part of 2020 will help give some people a little bit more perspective and decision-making and the power to put people in power that can hopefully facilitate more creations without worrying about finances or security. You started, so for people who are not familiar with CareerVillage, give us the vision before you started of what you wanted it to be and what was it actually like in its earlier years?
So the vision of CareerVillage has kind of always been that we would create an online community where students could get career advice that would help them prepare for careers. And what I recognized was that having a mentor is incredibly valuable. We don't have nearly enough mentors for all the students who need it. And so most students, either you got a mentor or you got put into a very wonderful high touch job training program, which were wonderful, like Year Up. It's all the great programs that are out there, or you got nothing. And there didn't seem to be much in between. And so the vision was like, well, there are some things I can't do everything a mentor can do for
Right.
you, but there are some things that a mentor can give you, the knowledge and encouragement. They believe in you and the self-efficacy and all that. You know, that we could do that. We could do those things at huge scale.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's the idea is like, let's try to make sure that nobody goes without. If I can't give everybody a mentor, at least I can get you the answers to your questions. I can get you encouragement. And the way that, and I experimented with a lot of things, but the way ultimately really zeroed in on delivering that and what CareerVillage has become is first and foremost, it's a very, very large career Q&A site.
Mm.
We did not invent the Q&A site. Stack Overflow and Quora and all those others preceded us, um, but we're a very good Q&A for this particular purpose, which is students who have some question or uncertainty, have either a really detailed question or a very, very loosely held question.
Mm.
It's all fine. We post it up, and then we've passed those questions out to our volunteer pool, and they'll bring in the answers. At the very beginning, the beginnings, it was like 4 classrooms in New York, and me literally emailing friends to get answers like emailing you and other friends to get the questions answered. But now it's significantly bigger. Now we've served career advice to over 4.5 million people in
Wow.
190 countries. And we have about, at this point, 59,000 volunteers around the world.
First of all, congrats. Those are crazy numbers. In hindsight, looking back at it, 9 years, I bet, it's holy crap. I can't believe we did all that. You started the organization in Boston and ended up moving not for CareerVillage, but just ended up moving to Silicon Valley, where the buzzword, the ultimate goal is scale and big, right? Just astronomical growth, which I think you've achieved from a nonprofit perspective. Share with a lesson on why you decided to take this venture as a nonprofit, where you could have easily taken a for-profit method, brought in some investors, you had a crazy network through all your experiences, and decided to monetize on this somehow and made it a little bit easier on you personally too, financially. Why nonprofit versus a for-profit venture?
It was basically a short-term versus long-term prioritization. I think if I was prioritizing exclusively in the short run, I might have thought more about being a for-profit and raising venture and trying to find a monetization strategy. But my real core purpose was to give back. I was thinking very long-term. To be fair, I didn't see this being a multi-billion-dollar valuation company, or I didn't know what it looked like. And I think some folks may be surprised to hear me say, well, so the long-term prioritization would lend itself toward being a nonprofit. But the reason I think that makes sense is that if you start a for-profit company with a social good purpose and you plan to take venture and you don't have a path to becoming a multi-billion, to being a unicorn company, you're going to lose control of your company at some point. I'm not guaranteeing it. I'm just saying it's very possible. You cannot guarantee that you're going to retain control of that organization and keep that company on with the purpose that you are hoping it has.
Sure.
You might get fired by your investors. Other things might come up.
Sure.
You just might find yourself one day having to do your utmost to retain control or to just make a profit. And really have that sort of supersede your initial social purpose. So I saw being a nonprofit as being sort of safer long-term play. This institution may not be a unicorn valuation organization ever, but this mission is evergreen. Let's build a career-ready generation. Like, it's evergreen. We're always going to need that. Let's enshrine that in the bylaws. Let's actually write the mission down, and let's force the board to work toward that mission. And that's what you do when you say to the state, I give up the equity. It belongs to the people. We're a nonprofit now. But in exchange, we are working on this mission and only this mission. That's kind of That's how we made the choice.
No, I think it's noble, man. And I've said this to you in person, so I'm not, trying to hype you up. Just we have or a microphone in front of us. I think it's one of the coolest things that I've seen my personal friends do, which is to give up what could have been, what likely was a guaranteed path to a very lucrative and traditionally safe career. I think you and I can
Definitely
also
could have
talk
made more
about.
money.
Oh, sure. Of
Definitely.
course. Of course. I think you and I can talk on a different conversation about the things that we learned in consulting that we never wish we had learned. But boy, are we glad we did, because now we're pursuing things that are more meaningful to the both of us. In the 9 years that you've run CareerVillage, you've obviously had some ups, some downs, some troubling days
Sure.
of you're creating, in essence, a marketplace for students who desperately want guidance, and then
Yeah.
convincing adults to say, hey, your time is worth, sitting down and opening up your browser and typing away meaningful answers.
Yeah.
How do you quality control that process to make sure that through the millions of questions that have now been answered, that there's I don't know, concerning activity that goes on between, or just bad advice? Do you get to judge what bad advice is on the platform?
I get to judge what advice is inappropriate for the platform, um, but we don't sort of like say, "Oh, this advice is 20% better than that advice," or anything like that. But to get to the question you're initially posing, which is a good one, we got to read everything. So we have team members who read everything as it's coming through, and we also have an amazing unsung heroes group of volunteers who are the site mods, and the
Mm.
mods, they review everything too. So, and they're unbelievably fast. They're so generous. They're such generous people, and they're really behind the scenes. But we review everything. Got to make sure it's appropriate. We try to do coaching in the application where we can, just to help people bring their advice to the next level. But I think part of the reason a Q&A is really valuable is, as long as you have multiple answers per question, create some natural competition to try to give the
Mm.
best, be the most helpful. And if we manage supply and demand well, which we do, and make sure there's always a lot of supply, um, you don't need every single answer to. You don't need somebody. You don't have to sit there for an hour and a half, like
Yeah.
just crafting every punctuation note. You could
Yeah.
be helpful. Somebody else can bring in another part of the perspective, and then somebody else can bring in another one, and somebody else might go spend an hour and a half and try to write some big treatise on your question. Um, but you can still have an impact
Yeah.
and still be helpful. If you got an hour and a half, it's great. If you got 5 minutes, that's fine too.
Yeah.
Answer from your perspective. Be encouraging. Um, and cite your source. You got to say, is firsthand experience, or
Yeah.
I heard it from my sister, or whatever. But you can have you can have an impact, and we keep an eye. We have to keep an eye.
I think it's the lessons that I've learned, unfortunately, a little bit later in life. And I always preface this now every time I give a
Later
talk
in life,
or talk
you're
to
such a young guy.
I mean, we're
Make us
literally
sound
both
incredibly old now.
Jared. We're literally both 36. Uh, now you got me lost in my train of thought. I guess the thing that became clear to me was that when you ask for advice, you have to do both at the same time, which seems like two opposite ends of binaryism. But you have to listen to everything that they tell you, but you also have to be willing to listen to nothing that they tell you, because you have to
Yeah.
appreciate the fact that it is one person's personal
It's
story or
true.
opinion. And I think when we talk to students, they're so hungry for information, and particularly students who might have to go to a careervillage.org to ask the question because they don't have people in their community, in their family, in their neighborhood who can answer those questions, right? So your
Yep.
customer base on the student side are questions who don't have dads who belong to the country club and fraternity brothers from way back when. And then
Yeah.
that's,
They don't know.
we're trying to bridge. Ultimately, you're trying to bridge the achievement gap, right? And then you are plugging a hole in the space of schools are not doing this. The families can't do it. The community doesn't know even what questions to ask. And so this is a safe space, somewhat anonymous in a forum format, to ask the dumb questions that your parents can't answer for you.
Yep.
So I think what you've created is super, super cool. Tell me the coolest story you've ever gotten from a student who was on your platform the past 9 years.
There's so many. I think there's one of the things I love about my job is that I get to see all the different ways that people benefit from the platform. So it just takes so many flavors, and I think one of the you hear from like I hear from a lot of students who turn to CareerVillage because it's really urgent for them that they find a path to financial stability, right? They know when they finish their education, they need a job, just like I did when I was a kid. And so I see the corollary. And for them, it might be different. They're not in New York City trying to be whatever a stockbroker is, right?
Yeah.
But they're in Mississippi. They want to be a nurse because she's, this young girl's caring for her brother and sister who are ill, and her mother who's out of work, and her father who has a part-time job. And she's on CareerVillage because she's trying to get into nursing school, and she wants to figure out how to navigate that path. So I love to hear the ways in which we're a valuable resource for students who are experiencing the same thing that I experienced when I was a kid.
Mhm.
It's heartbreaking, and it's also like that. If it feels purposeful. I think my favorite stories though are like stories from students who started off with us in high school, and now that we are a 9-year-old community, we have some students who started in high school and have actually gone through some or all of college with us. And they're starting to get jobs. And that's amazing. So, we have students who are now engineers at tech companies and who found out that that programming wasn't just a thing other people did, but something they could actually learn, and figured out how to go about doing that on CareerVillage starting like 7 years ago. Or students who, I love hearing from students who say, this right here, this person's the person I want to be when I grow up. So I had, students who say to me that they'll be looking through the profiles of the people who give them advice. And then they'll see somebody, and we're doing an interview or something, or we're sitting with them, and they'll say like, I think this is the first time I've ever personally found like an actual person who is doing my dream, like who I want to be when I grow up. That's her. And I love those moments, for sure. I have to acknowledge, like, we also get a lot of stories of heartbreak because people face really difficult times. And sometimes they share those on CareerVillage as they're looking for help. And we've actually gotten a few more of those recently. A lot of people are being hugely affected by COVID-19, training programs getting shut down, just like all of a sudden not sure they actually can graduate on time because they've been struggling with the online courses, internships getting canceled, people who've had job offers rescinded, and just a lot of challenges that come with any recession. But this one is a weird one. This is a strange type of beast, and it's really affecting a lot of people. And so we've got a lot of people who need a lot of help right now. And that's a real part of my job too, is just kind of trying to be there for people who are facing so much challenge.
To the best of your observation and knowing, or I guess knowledge of both sides of the equation, how important is representation in the adult mix, let's say? I guess this would be the supply side in your equation.
Yeah.
Is there a correlation between what the students look like and who answers their questions? Because I think content is so critical when you help somebody, but context is even more. And I don't know if that comes through in a Q&A format.
Yeah, it's super important. There are times when I think that the Q&A touches upon the shared context and understanding, and there are times when I feel like the question doesn't quite share what the context is around it, or the volunteer doesn't quite share some of their sort of biases going in. But it's a mixed bag. I think let me just start with this. What we hear from students is that it matters. And so recruiting a diverse volunteer pool is important to us. We also started to do things like we created groups within CareerVillage, which is a feature you can use to explicitly opt into getting advice from or giving advice to regarding like a specific demographic, and that's been helpful.
Oh, very cool.
But diversity in the volunteer pool, it's really important. So it's part of my staff's job is to try to make sure we are doing our best by diversity in the volunteer pool.
I think that's critically important. Obviously, we're on a podcast that specifically focuses on Asian American storytelling, because when I talk to students too, part of the reason, the big motivation for me to start this now was even 20 years after we went to high school, students still felt with all the privilege that they have, with all the access that they have with the internet, that they weren't seeing the people that look like them doing the things that they wanted to do. But the different thing now, 20 years later, is that there are people who look like me and you doing these things. And now it's just a matter of, let's get a mic in front of them, let's put a camera on them, and let's give them a platform to share their stories. Because when somebody finds you via CareerVillage or even on LinkedIn, they don't know 90% of the stuff we just talked about. And the context there of, holy crap, I went through that same thing, or I want to go through that same thing, is critically important. And I think it's just ultimately to make people feel, especially students who are going through, independent of identity issues, just so much stuff of expectation and competition and feeling less than and achieve, I don't feel like I'm achieving enough. And ultimately it is to make people feel like they're not alone, because nobody's ever alone. Whatever you're going through, somebody else is going through it. And so you mentioned it earlier, but right now during COVID-19 times, things are wonky, to for lack of a better term.
Well said.
It's weird, and it's nobody's fault. Particularly when it comes to job prospects, businesses are doing what they do, which is potentially to shut down things that are not essential to their own survival, or to cut back on spending some money. And so, we were in very, very good times for a few years leading into this. So the relative impact might even seem more drastic. What's the general sense you're getting from the student population now? Is there optimism? Is there, hey, this is just a seasonal thing and we'll get back to normal? And for students for whom really that real pressure of, I need to make money now, or everything I work for just seems to have disappeared overnight, and therefore I don't even know what my identity is anymore. You said you've been hearing some challenging stories from your students. What is a very smart and human and kind way that you've seen volunteers and your staff react to those messages?
Just a whole lot of empathy, a whole lot of caring, a lot of belief and encouragement is what I'm inspired by the most when I'm looking at what's happening right now on the platform, from the volunteer side at least. It is tragic in many cases, and I use that word in the sense that through no fault of your own, you're going to have a tough time. And that's not the case for everybody, but for some and for many, it's going to be harder. You've had some plans that are not going to work out the way you had hoped. I'm just thankful that they're not going through it alone, that we are there to give alternatives, to talk about plan Bs. Sometimes to say, look, your plan A is still good. You're fine. You're fine. You keep going. It's going to be okay. Or whatever the case may be, because you got to meet everybody where they are, right? But I've said to our staff, and I've said to the volunteers I've spoken with, now is the time when we got to be better than we've ever been as a support community. No student should go on CareerVillage and ask a question and have to wait for a long time to get an answer. Like, we need to be giving more answers faster, with more understanding and empathy and care and higher quality and more attention to detail and all that stuff than we've ever done before. So I'm happy that's what's happening, but I think there's no silver bullets for this. If you can wait on things, that's going to be a huge asset to have that flexibility. If you can't, you're going to need fallback options. And that's just the reality. And so I think that's what people are doing. we don't know how long this is going to last. We don't know when hiring will start to resume in earnest way again for most occupations. It could be relatively quick. It could be prolonged. So, if you're graduating within the next 24 months or the next 12 months or the next 4 years, it's going to be a different implication. You might not even notice versus you might actually be affected. So for those who are graduating literally this month, I'm sure it's on top of their mind for sure.
Yeah.
But sorry, I mean, there's no silver bullet answer.
Yeah.
But look, I think we just need to, for anybody listening who's not a student, right? Anybody who's just a citizen, reach out, contact students, be proactive. They may not always reach out to you, right? It's a scary time. They don't have time to go through every single person in their Rolodex and just think, I wonder if they would accept if I were to. But let's also note, it's scary, right? Like as a teenager, let's just take teenagers for a moment. As a teenager, just going to adults is scary, and asking for anything can be intimidating. It takes a little. We get teenagers all the time. Be like, we're like, hey, it's good idea to write a thank you note. They're like, I don't really know what to say. And we're like, it's okay, just say thank you. So sometimes you just need to know the words. Yeah. And so, if you as an adult know a young person, reaching out proactively, seeing how they're doing, I'll just give you the words right now. It's, hey, how you doing? That's it. Go send that out to your teenagers, or the young adults who are finishing education soon, and check in with them because they might need your help right now.
And if you don't have anybody like that in your life, well, you probably do.
CareerVillage.org.
That's exactly where I was going. Go to CareerVillage.org, sign up. Look, you might spend 10 minutes or 5 minutes leaving an answer to a question that just seems so common sense to you. And if you are listening to this, you are in my social network or somebody that I know. As Jared did earlier, let's admit to our giant bucket of privilege that we sometimes are so blinded by. This is not to make light of the tough, challenging situations that some of you may be going through right now. But this means that you have a cell phone, some time, maybe the internet, and the availability of time and energy to seek out stories that resonate with you. I fully understand that talking about identity and telling Asian American stories is not at the bottom of the hierarchy of needs pyramid. This is not a basic survival thing. We are here because we want to better ourselves and to get to that point where we want to be our best selves. And so if you are listening to this, I urge you, take a moment, CareerVillage.org. There's many, many ways to help. One is you physically going in there and answering questions. 2 is to make a small personal contribution, whatever you are comfortable with. Jared's 2-year runway ran out 7 years ago. So he is self-funding this through the generosity of its volunteer-based corporate partners, other people who see the value in changing literally millions of lives at scale. And if you work for a large company and you are fortunate enough to work for a large company with a giving budget, with a community engagement budget, or maybe you used to go build houses or go, feed the less fortunate in your own town for a corporate volunteer day. And obviously now those things are not possible. Share CareerVillage with your HR coordinator or whoever community development, community relations person is. We used to make fun of the term keyboard warrior even 2 months ago, and now that's taken on a whole new meaning. From the comfort and the safety of our home in front of our computers, we can do so much. And we're not just talking about telling other people to stay the F home and don't be an idiot. You can go and do a little bit more. And look, and here's one thing a personal story that I will share. Sometimes I think we have, regardless of what life stage you're in, we are perpetually taught to we are perpetually taught to feel that we are never enough to dish out advice, dish out any sort of perspective. I get this a lot when I speak to college students, and I challenge them and I say, hey, let's think back 4 years ago when you were in junior high school or high school. If you looked up to yourself now, would you not want advice from that person? And they go, yeah. I say, okay, cool. If you were in a high school, and wouldn't you not have some things to say for your younger brother or sister who's in junior high school and say, hey, these are the things that I wish I had known, because high school is a very challenging time. Look, anybody with multiple kids have seen this. Your older kid will teach the younger kid, starting the moment the second kid is born, everything about life. And so, no, you don't need to be at a certain level. You don't need to have made a certain amount of money or have a certain job title to then turn around and help the next person. The only thing you need to have is to be a damn human being and just know that your work matters. So wherever you are, and again, I think in the conversation of privilege, it matters not what your job title is. It matters not where you went to school. It matters not what your paycheck says. Everybody's opinion matters because people are going to and from very different places in life. There's so many things that I think I can share just to motivate everybody to say or start to feel that their opinion, their perspective matters. Because at the end of it, it is just a perspective. It is an opinion. You're not trying to tell this student literally what to do every day for the next 10 years of their lives. That's not the intent.
Trust the student to have the judgment to interpret your advice and all the other people's advice and come to a good decision for themselves, because they have that judgment and they are able to do that.
So it's everything matters, right? And the systems are in place so that if you give actual crappy advice, that the community will shut it down or not listen to you, or who knows? It's different for everybody, right? When you're helping literally millions of students, how do you judge the middle? How do you come to a point where you speak to the majority? But yeah, thanks for what you're doing, man. I've had the pleasure of swinging by your office and meeting your team members, and we've exchanged a lot of conversations over the years on how I am amazed by what you've created, and for a lot of the slack that consultants get sometimes of being tone deaf and literally blind to the world's woes, and to the point that people like Anand Giridharadas writes damn books about it and all the privilege that comes with it. It is really, really cool and amazing to see friends like you who then take all the experience and all the privilege and all the access and your giant Rolodex to go and point it at something that is not only so good, but as you said, it is evergreen, and its true impacts will never really be realized, because you might have changed the kid's life who will then go change others. And that chain of goodness is, you don't ever want to know you don't want to know that there is a cap to it. When you put things in terms of it does not end. If this were a for-profit venture, we would talk about the next fundraising round. We would next talk about the next valuation. We would talk about the exit. When you're doing good human work, it is non-quantifiable, and that is the most beautiful thing, because kindness is eternal and happiness is eternal. So thank you, man. It is an honor to call you a friend. I don't go on CareerVillage enough. I should. Heck, if any of CareerVillage students are listening to this, I'm serious, man. It's if any CareerVillage students are listening to this and you're like, oh, I've always wanted to start a podcast or learn a little thing about, business school or whatever, hit me up. We'll talk. Happy to help. And I want to thank you for your time. I know all of us, parents, particularly at home, working from our homes now, it is an extra layer of challenge. So thanks to you and your partner and your children for allowing us this time to have this conversation. I want to end the conversation here the same way that we end all of our shows. And it is a tip of the cap back to the name of the show, which is the Eurasian Americans. This show, while it is dedicated to my daughter and all of our children, has really been a show that's been 30 years in the making, 20 years in the making since I became an American. And it is really based on the notion that these conversations, this exact conversation that you and I had we had this conversation to listen to 22 years ago in high school, would our lives have turned out any different? I'm not complaining about the way it has turned out, because I think it's wonderful, but how many missed opportunities are there? So I wanted to create this conversation, this series of conversations, to really try to fill the gap of the things that I wish we had. And based on the conversation that I had with young folks and try to be there for the conversations that they want to have. So help us finish out the show. Write a letter to the community, say whatever it is in your heart, and finish out the letter. Dear Asian Americans.
I'd say, dear Asian Americans, let's not forget that identity is something we control and we get to decide. When people bring us their ideas of what our identity ought to be, you can do whatever you want with that. You can accept it, you can reject it, you can redefine it. You could be it right now, you can put it away later and put on something else if you want. And so you're always in control. And you have to understand as well that people sometimes will act upon their impression of what they think your identity should be. And that's their problem. We have to do our best to insulate ourselves from negative ramifications of that. But you're still in control of how you think about yourself. And that's what I tell my daughter and my son.
Thanks, man. Given all that's going on, even in highly densely Asian populated areas like where you live and where I live, we unfortunately hear so much negativity and just frightening stories of, I can't believe somebody said that. I can't believe somebody actually did that. Fear brings out a completely different side of humanity that sometimes we don't want to see. But you're right. Anything that happens to us is never a reflection of who we are. It is everything about the other person who is dispensing that hate and the ugliness. So be proud of who you are. Whatever generation you are, wherever home is for you, and whatever language you speak, when you want to yell at the idiot on the road, which they say is your true mother tongue, be proud of who you are and know that somewhere in the world, there's an exact replica of you going through the same thing. That person might be a little bit older than you or a little bit younger than you, but there have been billions of people who live on this earth. Therefore, I can guarantee you that whatever you think you're going through, that you feel so alone, somebody has gone through it, somebody is going through it. And you then later sharing that story of how it's impacted you will then go on to change countless lives. So keep sharing their stories. Go on CareerVillage.org. Share your answers, share your life experiences. So thanks, man. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you, Jerry.
No, it's my pleasure, man. Look, we'll do it soon. But a lot of people have asked me, this is now not the release, but the recording 43rd, 44th episode. And they're like, what the hell's your story, dude? How come we never get to hear from you?
Yeah.
I provide a little bit of commentary here and there, but this has been the funnest thing I've ever done in my life. I get to sit here and I get to ask questions and learn and connect with people who have volunteered to come on a public platform and share their intimate stories. Sometimes stories that they've never told anybody else. So I get to have a very, very fun job and to get heartwarming messages from listeners and friends alike about how this little podcast has impacted their lives in a very, very short amount of time in the past 2 months has been one of the coolest things that I've ever done. I can't imagine what this little show will look like in 9 years in the time that you've built CareerVillage 2. So thank you to better days when we can celebrate in person. But in the meantime, everybody, go to CareerVillage.org. Let them know that Jared sent you. Maybe they'll listen to your advice a little bit more. And if you're a student, go on CareerVillage.org and ask away. Whatever the craziest, most detailed, specific, I don't think there's anybody who can answer this question in the world. There's somebody out there. We'll find that person for you. And hopefully we'll help you make sense of some of the unknowns and some of the challenges that you're feeling. So thanks, man. We'll talk soon.